Another day, another recap. Today's movie we'll be going over is titled Point Blank. This movie shows us police corruption and brutality at its finest and how there's always someone to put a span in the works. Without further ado, enjoy the recap. The film starts with a loud bang, followed by a man sprinting desperately. He takes shelter behind a column as bullets fly towards him. Returning the fire, he manages to fend off some of the attackers. As he continues to escape, he urgently calls his escape driver. The driver responds, saying he'll be there in a minute. In his panic, the fleeing man mistakes another car for his pickup and stupidly gets hit. The police swarm in, forcing his actual driver to make a hasty exit. Enter Paul, a family man sharing his home with his pregnant wife, Taryn. She's eagerly waiting for both the arrival of their baby and for Paul to finish setting up the baby's room. The news reports another tragedy. The assistant DA Joshua is the latest victim in a series of attacks on high-ranking officials. Amidst this, Paul's phone rings. It's time for his shift. As he arrives at the hospital, we learn he's a dedicated nurse, ready for another day of serving patients. Over at the crime scene, Detective Masterson scans the area, trying to piece together the events. Lieutenant Regina approaches, explaining that she was the first responder and did her best to assist. Trying to offer some solace, Masterson informs Regina that Joshua wasn't entirely defenseless. He managed to fire a shot that likely hit an assailant. As they discuss this, Detective Jones chimes in, mentioning 2 recent admissions in local hospitals for gunshot injuries. Hearing this, the team is energized and they quickly set out to follow the lead. At the hospital, Abe has a major concussion and is unconscious. Paul notices the window is open and a man jumps inside and starts to smack him around. The man grabs Abe's bag and runs for it. Within minutes, Paul gives a statement to Regina and they chit-chat for a while until Paul is handed her police card. Janet, the manager, tells Paul to take the night off and he returns home. He tells his wife what happened, and she panics a bit. Paul heads off to the bathroom but is smacked from behind. The man also belts his wife before returning and knocking Paul out. Eventually, he comes back to it when his phone rings. He answers to hear his wife screaming and crying. The man on the other line says that Paul involved himself and he tells him to go back to the hospital and get his brother out. And if he speaks to anyone, his wife will die. Paul immediately goes to the hospital and stares at the card Regina gave him. He gets a message saying to call his number when he leaves. He starts greening out in the bathroom, clearly a lot for him to take in, but he follows through. He steals Janet's card and begins putting all types of medicine and whatnot inside a bag. He walks away very calm and collected and walks into Abe's room. There, he spots an officer in the room watching the prisoner. Paul says that Abe needs to go to imaging downstairs, and the officer says he'll escort him. They wheel Abe down the hall as the 2 detectives walk into the hospital. Paul goes inside the elevator and presses level 3 underground as the cop is distracted on his phone. The 2 detectives speak about Abe and his brother who are street mercenaries for hire. They work for someone named Big D and the word is they owe him some money. Back in the elevator, Paul unplugs a cord faking that Abe is flatlining. The officer goes to grab the defibrillator and Paul shocks him instead. The detectives walk into Abe's room to see he is not there. Paul then gives Abe some adrenaline, which wakes him up. He gives him some morphine as the detectives see on the cameras that Paul has him. Paul takes Abe out the elevator and the 2 take off with the detectives seeing them. They run up the stairs as the duo gets stuck on the gate. When they see Masterson, Abe floors it and manages to get past him. Paul then tells him about Abe's brother threatening his wife and soon-to-be child. Abe's not happy to hear this and calls his brother. They speak about a meetup point until Abe says not to harm the woman or child and gives the phone to Paul to speak to her. But the phone call doesn't last long until the brother reveals his name to be Mateo. Seems the 2 brothers are being threatened by Big D. Paul's wife says she needs to lie down but instead uses this distraction to elbow Mateo and try to escape. He holds a gun at her and says to not play around or she's dead. The other duo heads down to a homeless hangout where Paul stares at Regina's card. Meanwhile, Regina asks what the connection between the 2 brothers and the DA office is. Masterson states that Mateo was looking at 10 years in prison, but Abe offered the now-dead Joshua a drive that would incriminate every dirty cop. Now back to a stressed-out Paul. Abe tells him he sold his car and to make his way home. Paul refuses though and chases Abe. He fires a bullet next to him and tells him that he's coming along. Abe tells him no, but is swayed once he realizes he needs a doctor next to him or he'll collapse. They make their way into a station where the 2 brothers are meeting up. Abe tells Mateo to stop as it's a trap, but the reception bugs out and Abe is forced to cause a distraction. Taryn tries to run but is eventually caught by Mateo. He is spotted and cops begin to pursue him. Taryn screams as they swerve through cars and floor the accelerator. Mateo's driving causes 2 cops to collide and he manages to get away. Abe and Paul also manage to escape, and Abe needs another morphine shot for the pain. Out of nowhere, Paul gets whacked and Abe grabs the assailant and fights him through the car wash and eventually gets the upper hand and drops him. They steal the man's radio and spot his police badge, which isn't good news. The duo is forced to hijack a car off an old lady and the two detectives are immediately alerted. Within minutes, they are tracked down and the cops try and lay out some traps to stop the car, which doesn't work. But now they end up right in front of the detectives. Paul punches the car as fast as it can go and Abe instructs him where to drive. Suddenly, they slam the brakes and cause a mini barricade as they run for their lives. Paul gets an idea to make his way to Pops, a friend he sees around. This allows them to hide and escape. Mateo, on the other hand, apologizes to Taryn for involving her in this mess. She tells him that what he's doing is causing harm to her and the baby. But still, he doesn't allow her to go and gets into the backstory of how it's just been him and his brother since they were kids. He makes his way into a hidden factory, but he seems to have a tail watching him. Meanwhile, Abe and Paul speak to each other how Pops was one of Paul's clients that he saved back in the days. Back at the factory, Mateo tells Taryn she can leave when Abe comes. He hides the duffel bag he secured from his brother earlier and gets a message from Big D again. Seems he is not too happy. Abe and Paul finally get the all clear from Pops and make their way to a man named Big Cheetah. Abe walks up to him and wants his favor, which Cheetah says he has none. As the two speak with each other, Paul recharges his phone and gets a call from Mateo. He answers as Abe is handed keys to a car outside. He then spots Paul on the phone and holds his gun at him until he speaks to his brother. A message then comes in that says, "Get down." Abe holds Paul at gunpoint and says his wife is dead because of him. Simultaneously, it seems that the stress of the day causes Taryn to go into labor, and with that, the detectives and another officer storm the pawn shop. Bullets are fired, and Paul is held at gunpoint by Masterson. Regina kills Cheetah and starts laying kicks into the defenseless Abe. She asks for the drive and doesn't find it on him. She holds Abe's pistol instead of her own gun and screams at Abe to hand it over. Abe asks if she's going to make this look like Joshua's death, and Masterson realizes that she is a corrupt cop. Seems she was the one that killed Joshua all along and framed Abe. She puts a bullet into Masterson's head, and the radio flickers as other police are arriving soon. She tells Jones the story to say and the evidence to get rid of as she walks outside to stall the approaching police. Just as Jones is about to kill Abe, Paul shoots him multiple times and ends him. This causes him to get into some shock, but he pushes through and escapes through the back alongside Abe. Regina then storms inside and sees Jones dead on the ground. She swears and realizes she's in real deep shit. Back at the factory, Mateo lays Taryn to the ground. She tells him that she needs to go to a hospital or he'll have to deliver her baby. He says hospital, obviously, but just needs to let his brother know. As Mateo walks off, he is shot down. A massive man then starts laying into him as Taryn hides. Mateo runs amok on the man, and as he gets wasted, Taryn tries to help him but is instead held at gunpoint. The man then puts a bullet into Mateo, and the scene cuts to Paul losing his marbles. Abe tells him to relax, but Paul can't handle that he just killed a cop. Within minutes, they arrive at the factory. They see a blood trail on the floor and follow it to see Mateo almost lifeless. As Paul is the nurse, the duo starts doing what they can to help. Mateo says they took his wife, and Paul says there's too much blood loss to help him now. As Mateo breathes very deeply, Abe holds him and comforts his little brother as much as he can until Mateo finally stops. Paul watches this and starts realizing that the two brothers were just two children trying to survive the streets alone with nothing but each other. Soon enough, the thug that kidnapped Taryn meets up with Regina. Turns out he's a dirty cop, and Regina tells him she needs him to destroy all the evidence from the pawn shop and to bring Taryn inside. In the meantime, Paul stitches up a wound Abe managed to get during the cop chase. We also learn that Paul and his wife are having a baby boy. Abe then grabs the duffel bag with the drive and picks up his pistol. Paul tells him what's he doing, and there's a master plan in mind for Abe. Kill every dirty cop he sees. Paul tries to convince him otherwise, but Abe says they have his wife and can't get her back any other way. Paul comes up with a plan to grab the tape from the pawn shop to incriminate Regina. As this happens, Taryn is escorted inside the warehouse, and Regina says that Paul killed her man and is going to get it. Abe and Paul pull up to a trap house and say they want to speak with Big D. A massive unit then comes out, but we find out the main man isn't as big as we thought. He tells Abe he's got a lot of nerve rocking up to the house with his men out looking to kill him. Abe gives him the cash in the bag, but Big D says it isn't enough and for his men to kill him. He instead opens a flash drive, and the boys all get scared only to realize they're just being wimps. Abe explains it has all the dirty cops' names, addresses, secret bank accounts, as well as their passwords, and Big D is very happy to hear that. He invites the duo inside, and while this takes place, Regina and the other dirty cop are cleaning the tapes at the pawn shop. Regina looks at Taryn and says, "Let's call Paul." They call him, and Regina gets straight to it. His wife is giving birth and she won't last too long. She gives him coordinates and an hour to be there. Abe and Paul are then told by Big D, who says his man on the inside tells him that Paul's wife is held up in a narco building. Big D wants the backstory to everything, and Abe decides to enlighten him. His brother was looking at 10 years in prison, and Abe, being the older brother, makes a deal: the drive for his brother's freedom. As the exchange had to be in person, Abe walks into the house to see Joshua dead on the scene. They tried to kill Abe next, but he managed to escape from a window and take off running. Sometime later, the duo is handed police uniform, and according to Big D, they have been deputized. He then tells his men, let's go out and play. On the street, he starts talking as if he's shooting a movie, and I think that's his plan. Paul messages Regina that he's at the location. Big D then says action, and a car starts moving with his men pushing it down the street. They all stop except for one that stays to guide its direction. He is handed a Molotov which sets the car ablaze. The driver jumps out and the car smacks a cop car and blows up right in front of a police department. Paul calls 911 and reports a fire at the address. The cops are immediately on site, and Big D orders his man to go record the money shot. Regina is quickly called down to the location and spots the burning car. The ambo also rocks up within minutes, and that's the cue for the boys to get ready. From the chaos outside, Taryn manages to make a quick escape and hide inside the building. Paul also uses this chaos as he carries a fake injured Abe into the cop shop undetected. They walk through the corridors, and Taryn is found by the dirty cop who throws her around. Regina makes her way into the station but is held at gunpoint by Abe. He disarms her, and Paul hears his wife scream and goes running. He dives at the dirty copper as his wife screams. Paul and the cop throw heavy blows at each other, and Paul starts getting belted until he grabs one of his instruments and stabs the dirty cop. He runs to his wife as Abe throws Regina on the floor. She speaks about how high the corruption goes, and as it turns out, Abe had a secret camera in her office the entire time, and she knows that she stuffed up bad. She keeps on mouthing off, and Abe gives her a piece of his boot to shut her up. Big D's man then says he got the money shot, and that's a wrap for him. Some news reporters are also on the scene, and Abe goes to the cameraman and hands him the hidden camera. With that, he finally smiles and walks away. Inside, Taryn is giving birth, and I'm not going to lie, birth scenes in movies makes me real uncomfortable. Regina awakens to find her face on the news and sees a pistol in front of her. As she grabs it, police storm the room, and as she tries to shoot, she is instead killed in the process. 1 year later, Paul is playing a game with his new son. They get out his 1-year-old birthday cake, and Paul gets a heartfelt message from Abe. With that, the family of 3 take a photo together, and the scene transitions to Abe driving and smiling at the picture of the birthday cake. The end. Thanks for sticking around. If you enjoyed this, press that like button, and I'll catch you on the next one.